question you might be asking yourself is, besides being a psychologist slash therapist, what qualifies me to deal with your depression? Well, I'll tell you this. I was so depressed one time in my life that I didn't even know I was depressed. I thought I was just angry. I was so angry that my depression slash anger caused me to end up going to prison. And this is what happened. I was in the Air Force when I was a young man, from the ages of, say, 17 to 21. And I was stationed in Michigan. And I didn't really have a whole lot of contact with home while I was in the Air Force. I just didn't, for whatever reason. So anyway, I'm 21 years old. In 1966, I get out of the Air Force, and I come home to find that my parents are divorced. I had no idea that they were getting a divorce, or that they were divorced. My mother was living in a part of Boston called Brookline Village, and my father was living in the part of Boston called Dorchester. So I came home. I wanted to live with my mother, and she didn't really have much room. She only had a one-bedroom apartment, and she suggested that I go live with my father. So I did, but I visited her often as I could. So then, after a while, I decided to, think about what I'm going to do with my life. So I decided to go back to school, or go to college. I hadn't been to college before, so I decided to go to college. I had been in the Air Force, so I had this thing for flying and stuff like that, although I never did any flying when I was in the Air Force, but I had the idea of wanting to do that type of thing. And what happened was, I got out of the Air Force, and this was during the time of the beginning of what we call the space race, when we had Armstrong walking on the moon and stuff like that. And so I thought to myself that I think I want to be an astronaut. So I went to a school in Boston called Wentworth Institute. And at Wentworth Institute, I majored in aeronautical and space engineering. And so at the end of the first semester, when we were taking our final exams, I had an epiphany. Like when you have a feeling that something is wrong. You don't know what it is, but something just isn't right. And so then I said, well, I'm going to go visit my mother. Now, I should have been taking my exams, but this epiphany is what I'm calling it. This feeling was so strong that I just stopped everything I was doing. I went to my mother's apartment. I'm banging on the door, and I can't get in because nobody answers. The neighbors come out of their apartments because they hear me banging on the door and want to know, what am I doing? And I said, well, I'm trying to reach my mother. My mother lives here. And I said, okay, we haven't seen her in about a week. So I said, okay. So I go down to her job. Now I have to understand that I didn't have a car at the time, and so I was traveling on public transportation. So I went from Brookline Village to downtown Boston, where she worked, and the receptionist there told me that she had called about a week ago and said that she got brushed by a car driven by a white male and was going to go home and lay down for a while, which she did. The problem is that she died from internal hemorrhaging. I go back to my mother's apartment. I'm banging on the door again, and neighbors come out and they say, look, while you were gone, the ambulance came and they took your mother's body out, and she is at the morgue, and you need to go down there and identify her body. Okay. So I go down to the morgue, which is a very scary place to be. And they have the body, just like on television, they have the bodies in drawers. So they're pulling out the drawer where my mother's located. And I can see her hair, And so I yell, stop, 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 that's my mother. And my mother, being a Navajo, mixed with some other stuff, had a very distinctive type of hair and texture of hair. I think she was Navajo and Irish. I'm not sure. At any rate, they told me that her body had begun to decompose. And I didn't want the last visual of my mother to be her decomposing body. So I told them to stop pulling the drawer out when I could see her hair. And I identified my mother by her hair. Now, obviously I was upset. I was all over the place. I was just really, really, really in bad shape. So I told my father, my brother, and my sister. My father set it up for her to have her funeral, in a part of town called Mission Hill, which is like, I think it's either Roslindale or Jamaica Plain, part of Boston. And so after the funeral, I found myself being really, really angry. And I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And I kind of fell in with a crowd of people that were thieves. And although I had never been a juvenile delinquent, I had never stolen anything in my life, I became a thief. And we would go to the white suburbs and we would break into warehouses and steal televisions, steal safes and stuff like that. And that's how I ended up going to prison. They sent me to Walpole prison, which is the maximum security prison at first, and then they sent me to the forestry camp because my crime was a non-violent crime. Non-violent. I wasn't doing anything violent, Matter of fact, they sent me to Walpole, and then they sent me to Norfolk, minimum security prison, which is where, what's his name? Malcolm X. That's where Malcolm X was incarcerated. And of course, the funny thing is, and then from there, I stayed there about a week or two, and then they sent me to the forestry camps, way out in the boondocks somewhere. So, where there were no walls, I was kind of living in a barracks situation. But what's really strange is I was in Norfolk prison, and now I live in Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk prison is in Norfolk, Massachusetts. Now I live in Norfolk, Virginia. Just a strange coincidence. So anyway, this is what gives me the authority to speak on depression. Not just because I'm a psychologist, but also because I've lived it, I've had it, I've been there.